struggling, I can look to and know that one day I will receive my reward. When times get hard, I like to focus on verse 8, that crown of righteousness. And when it gets a struggle, when maybe a study didn't go as well as I wanted it to, I can look at the end of this verse and know that this crown isn't just for me, but it's to all those who love His appearing. But sometimes what I don't focus on as much as verse 8 is verse 7. That I have to fight this good fight. And that can be intimidating when I understand what the warfare I'm involved in is. Ephesians 6 describes this warfare like this: "Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." That I'm involved in a warfare between evil and good. You are involved in a warfare between evil and good. There's two sides only, and you're contributing to one. You're on the side of the Lord, or you're on the side of Satan and his forces. And that idea alone can be intimidating and too much, enough to where you just want to give up. But I think the Lord has given us a tool that we can use, can give us stories that we can use from the Old Testament specifically about what it means to fight for the Lord. What does it mean to engage in warfare and have victory with the Lord on your side? And I want to look at one of those battles this morning. If you would, please turn your Bibles to Exodus 17. Exodus 17 is going to be our base passage for this evening. And as we're getting here, to give you some context to what is happening, the Israelites have just gone over the Red Sea, and this is the first battle that they've endured as a people after the Exodus. And so we start in verse 8. Verse 8 of chapter 17. "Then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. So Moses said to Joshua, 'Choose for us men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand.' So Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill." Who's Amalek? Who are the Amalekites, if you would? The Amalekites are descendants of the grandson of Esau, Amalek. And so you would think that these being a familial relationship, Amalek and Israel, that when they see each other, maybe there would be an embrace. That Israel just got out of a hard time, so Amalek's going to bring them in close, maybe give them some food, some shelter, some help in this. At least be tolerable. That there's this relationship where you can go on your way, I'll go on mine, we're kind of related, so you just do you, I'll do me. But instead what we see here is that Amalek engages Israel in this conflict. That they want to have hurt against the Israelites. And a reason for this is because they're raiders. The way that they gather their wealth, the way they build their nation is by taking from other people. By taking and storing up for themselves. And they would do this violently. In the ancient Near East, it was considered an insult to be considered a friend of an Amalekite. Because it wasn't just that they would fight. It wasn't just that they would fight violently. But they would use shameful tactics. They would attack the weakest parts of a people. In Deuteronomy 25, it talks about in the same instance that the Amalekites would go to the rear of the Israelites. And they would attack where they had the elderly, the women, the children, where they were most vulnerable. Does this sound like your relationship? Does this sound like the warfare that you've been involved in with Satan? That it seems like he's trying to come at you when you're your weakest. Maybe you and your spouse are on rocky terms that day. And that's when temptation seems to rise the most. Maybe work's been so overwhelming and I just can't do it anymore. And that's when the opportunity to sin comes up. Maybe I'm finally trying to get my relationship with God back on the right track. And yet, it seems to be that sin is all around me. Satan attacks us when we're at our weakest too. And the struggle in that is that we're not the Amalekites in this story. No, we're the Israelites. And the Israelites have been in bondage. They've been in Egypt the past 400 years. They don't know what warfare is like. And they're facing trained warriors. And there's no chance that they have victory in this battle. Trained warriors against slaves that don't know battle at all. See, it's actually interesting if you look at the Israelites thus far, because the stories until this point is bitter water is made sweet. That they finally find water, but it's bitter, and God has to make it sweet. And then the next story is bread from heaven. They run out of food, and so God has to provide them with manna. And then the next story is they run out of water again, and then God has to provide water from a rock. These people can't even get their basic needs on their own. And that's us. Do you recognize your own weakness in this battle? Do you realize that if the story stopped there, it would be that the Israelites got absolutely executed and there's no more story? But the story doesn't stop there, because Moses doesn't go on that hill alone. Moses takes something in his hand to go on top of that hill. He takes the staff of God. That God is in this warfare. God is in this battle with the Israelites. And He's in this warfare and battle with us too. That God chose us as His warriors. So not only can we share in the battle, but we can also share in the victory. And what we have in God for that. As we go on, we see what it's like to fight with God in this battle. What it means to prevail through this struggle. We see what Israel does against Amalek. And we can see what we should do against our temptations, against our trials. Let's start reading in verse 11. Whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed. And whenever he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew weary, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. While Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side, and on the other side. So his hands were steady until the going down of the sun, and Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the sword. How do we prevail in this battle? How do we obtain the victory? Well, the first thing we see in this is in verse 11. When Moses held up his hands, Israel won. And when Moses lowered his hands, Amalek prevailed. But it wasn't the fact that Moses was holding up his hands. It was the fact that God's staff was in his hands when he was holding them up. That he was fully reliant on the Lord in this battle. That he understood that he was weak. He understood that the victory wasn't found in himself. And every time he might have had doubts, every time he was looking at Israel and thinking, well, they're doing a pretty good job. It seems like they're strong enough, they're doing good against the Amalekites, and he would lower the staff down, well, Amalek would prevail. Maybe this has been true in your walk with God, that there's been times where you're lifting up God like you need to, that you're giving Him the place of glory like you should, you're giving Him the position in your life like you should, and you see the victory. And in that time of victory, maybe you have confidence in yourself like you shouldn't. And so you start to lower the staff. You start to lower God. Instead of relying on Him, I rely on my own wisdom and my own strength, because it seems to be that I'm doing pretty good in this life. And then Amalek prevails. Satan prevails. We need to make a consistent effort like Moses did to raise that staff every day. That's a choice that Moses made here. Is it a choice that you're making? To make sure to put God where He needs to be in your life. To hold Him up like you need to. Because if you don't, Satan's going to prevail in this battle. He will win. But raising your hands can sometimes get tiring. Doing something so simple as putting your hand in the air can get overwhelming. We've had this young men training here, and it's been a blessing. It's been great. It's been great to see all the young guys that want to get involved in doing these things, coming up here, serving God. And I haven't really been around younger kids in a long time in a classroom setting. And they reminded me of something that I used to do when I was a kid in class. It wasn't exactly time to be called on for questions just yet. And there was a few of them that would raise their hand like this. And they'd be raising their hand in the air, and their arm would get tired, and they'd reach behind their arm like this, and they hold it up. Because it's just so tiring to hold your hand up like that for so long. Something so simple as raising your hand. And sometimes the walk with God is simple things that can get tiresome. And so what do I do? What do I do when my hands get weary? What do I do when I'm trying to follow God, but it just seems overwhelming and too much? Well, what Moses did here was he relied on Aaron and Hur. That Aaron got on one side of him and held up one arm, and Hur got on the other side and held up the other. Aaron is the brother of Moses, and Hur, by Jewish tradition, is the brother-in-law of Moses, Miriam's husband. And so his family was quite literally holding him up in his walk with God. We are a family, one that is deeper than blood. We are a spiritual family that's united under God. Are we holding each other up? When things get difficult, when things get tough, are we there for each other? And this takes two sides in this. First, you have to be willing to ask for help. Moses had to be willing to be held up. Now, when you're facing temptation and you're getting overwhelmed, you can't handle it on your own. You need help. Are you reaching out to people? Are you putting your pride aside and saying, I need help with this temptation? I'm struggling, and I've been struggling a while. I need your help in this. When life's getting overwhelming and that trial is getting burdensome, are you reaching out to one another and saying, I need help? Are we being like Moses? Are we letting people hold us up? But at the same time, are we being like Aaron and Hur as well? Are we willing to get around people and hold them up? Do you think that church is all about you? When you come here, it's about how I'm served and how these people are treating me? Or is it about how there's people that have needs out here? There's people that have struggles. There's people that feel lonely, and I can serve them in that. And I'm looking outward in my church family. Because the thing is, it might be a struggle to raise that arm for a while, but it probably is a struggle to hold someone else's arm up for a while too. That sometimes there's inconvenience and pain in holding each other up. But it's what God has called us to do, to hold each other up in our times where we're weary and tired and don't want to keep going. We have family for support. Use it, embrace it, have each other. But now, instead of thinking about what it's like on top of that hill, I want you to think about what it's like to be Joshua. Joshua fighting in this battle on the battlefield. You're lifting a sword maybe for the first time in your life, and you're fighting against this people who are shameful in their tactics. They're not afraid of violence. They've done this many times before. But every time you get in a swing, every time you might see a friend go down, you can look up at that hill. You can look up at that hill and you can see Moses with his arms held high. His arms held high, and they're steady. They're steady in the air. And you can see him with Aaron and Hur next to him, lifting him up. Think about how if you were Joshua, that would give you so much more courage. It would bolster your faith, and it would want you to keep going in the fight you're enduring. God has given us a family to lean on each other. But God has also given us a family to look at. That you're not alone in your walk with God. This isn't just about you. It's not just about my salvation and my walk, but people are looking at you. People are looking at you, and you have influence on those around you. College kids, you have influence on each other. If you're making unwise decisions, that will affect those around you. It'll affect these middle schoolers and these high schoolers that look up to you as an example. Parents of young children, we look up to you. We have no idea what it's like to have all these kids running around, for work to be overwhelming. I don't. But I know that if you're that busy and still prioritizing the Lord like you need to, well, I can too, no matter how busy I get. That you're an example. I can look at your steadfastness, and I can know that I can endure as well. Older members, I can look at you and I can say, maybe you're at a different stage in life than me. Maybe you're further along. Maybe you're more towards the goal. But you've endured hardship. You've endured temptation and struggle. You've gone through a hard life. And I can know that if you're holding steady to the Lord, well, maybe I can too. And I can keep fighting along on that battlefield, enduring whatever is in front of me. That we all have a role in this family of holding each other up, but we're all also being looked at for an example. Be steady with your hands. But they have the victory, but the story doesn't end there. It continues on in verse 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Write this as a memorial in a book, and recite it to the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under the sun." And Moses built an altar and called it, "The Lord is my banner," saying, "A hand upon the throne of the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation." Moses builds this altar, and he calls it, "The Lord is my banner." If I was naming an altar, it probably wouldn't be my first pick. But I think that's because I'm just unfamiliar with the language. What does it mean to call something "the Lord is my banner"? Isn't the banner like a thing? It is. It's a victory flag. What he's saying and making this altar is the Lord had victory here. And a flag can be raised and looked at. And we can always look at this point, we can always pass this place, and we can see that the Lord had victory here. That he was with us in this fight. That when we relied on him, it was enough against an enemy that was too much for us alone. And Moses is told to write this as a memorial. And why this is interesting is because this is the first time Moses is ever told to write something down. This moment in Israelite history is the first time Moses is explicitly told, write this down. Which means it has value. Has value that we should look at and take in. But he's told to write it down, not for us in this moment, but for Joshua, for the ears of Joshua. And you're thinking, why would that be? Why would Joshua need to hear this? Well, who's going to endure more battles after this one? Joshua. Who's going to lead the Israelites into the land of Canaan? Joshua. The Lord knows that Joshua has a hard road ahead of him, and he says, remind him of this battle. Remind him of how he did this well. Remind him how he looked on that hill and he saw Moses, Aaron, and Hur. Remind him of how he saw the staff of God being held up. Sometimes I think we can have an unhealthy relationship with the past. That maybe we want to lift it up like we shouldn't. I just wish I was back there again. But I also think sometimes we can push the past down and act like it never existed. That we think of our struggles and we think of the temptations that were hard for us, and we want to put it in a box and never see it ever again. God says, open up that box. Remember that struggle. Remember that battle. And remember how I gave you the victory in it. Remember how you were struggling with that sin so much, but I helped you overcome. Remember that terrible period in your life where you were feeling awful about everything around you, but I helped you through. Remember the victory that I gave you. Write it down. Because you're going to have another battle ahead. And I'll give you the victory then if you remember what you did in this moment when I give you the victory now. But the war isn't over here. This is just one battle. See, the Amalek is going to battle with them from generation to generation. That's what verse 16 says, that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. And this is what it looks like in the history of the Israelite people. That Saul is going to come in contact with the Amalekites again, and the Lord's going to say, wipe them completely out. And he's going to fail to do so. This is how Saul loses his throne. And then 15 chapters later, we see the Amalekites again. They come and they do what they do best. They raid a weak people. They take David's wives and his stuff and all his men's wives and their stuff. And then David goes in and kills all but 400 of them. And then we see them pop up again, or at least someone who's related to them. Naaman, in the story of Esther, he's an Agite. That would be the same as like a pharaoh for the people of Egypt. And so he's going and he's trying to wipe out Israel completely. Again, the Amalekites are against Israel, but God has the victory in that one too. And then they're eventually all gotten rid of in 1 Chronicles 4. God's promise came true that he's going to utterly blot them out from under heaven. And our war is continuing as well. That maybe you've endured a battle. You've endured a temptation. You've endured a trial. God says, the war's not over yet, but I will give you victory in the future. And he says, one day I'm going to utterly blot out your enemy. That I'm going to throw Satan into the lake of fire. That I will have victory, not just the battle, but the war. And until then, we have an altar that was raised for us. We have a banner that was raised for us. A victory flag of the cross. Where God and Jesus had victory that day over sin and death itself. And we can always look back at that banner as a reminder for our ears that God had the victory then and he will have the victory in the future. And I can say something like, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Henceforth, there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day. But not only to me, but all those who have loved his appearing. Have you fought the good fight? Maybe you haven't been relying on God like you should. Instead of raising that staff, you've lowered it and given up. Maybe you're enduring a trial that's so big you can't put it on your own shoulders and you need the help of the congregation. Prayers from us, love from us. There's no shame in that whatsoever. Or maybe I haven't even gotten involved in the fight in the first place. That I too want a crown. You can become a part of this fight. You can become a part of this crown of righteousness. You're baptized and raised anew a child of God. Whatever your need, please come forward as we stand and as we sing.
Give me thy heart, says the